So I am Colin Seditas. I work for ClimateXChange, and I'm the lead for climate and economy projects. I'm actually on secondment from Scottish Government at the moment, from the Climate Change Division of Scottish Government. And much appreciate your interest in coming to this session and your interest in working for CXC. As I'm sure you're all very much aware, it's a very interesting, challenging time for climate policy, as Scotland's moving towards these 2045 really ambitious targets. I will take us on to talk about ClimateXChange and give you a little bit of background about what we are, how we do it, how we do things. So ClimateXChange, CXC, is Scotland's centre of expertise on climate change. We've got Scottish Government has a number of centres of expertise. So CXC is one of 5. We're funded entirely through Scottish Government, and CXC has been working since 2011, working throughout that time, always looking to commission, manage and deliver the research and analysis that Scottish Government's policy teams need on adapting to climate change or transitioning to a net zero future. So we're completely guided by Scottish Government policy needs. All of our work is all about helping Scottish Government policy teams getting the evidence that they need as policymakers to move forward. So it's important to stress that really the work we commission is not academic work, it's direct evidence to support policymakers moving forward. And if we could move to the next slide, Inish. Thank you. So CXC is hosted at Edinburgh University. We're supported by 4 directors who give us the strategic direction. They manage the way we do our knowledge exchange work and our research, and ultimately they're responsible for the effective delivery of all the projects that we do. So all the projects that people bid for, ultimately those projects are signed off by one of the directors. Hosted by Edinburgh University, but as you'll see, the directors come from other institutions. Kate Donovan is the chair, based at Edinburgh. She leads on policy. Her theme lead is risk and adaptation, and she chairs this directorate group. Pete Smith's in Aberdeen, science with a theme of land use. And we have Leanne Sutherland from James Hutton and Stuart Galloway from the University of Strathclyde. We also have a wider advisory panel, which it helps provide advice for all the work we do, but it can help shape specifications, it can advise on methodologies, and there's a call out at the minute for more representation on our advisory panel, so that may be of interest to some people on the call. We can share a link during the session or afterwards, but the advisory panel works to help shape the way we do put together our specifications and do the methodologies and develop methodologies with our policy teams. If you could move to the next slide, please. So day-to-day work of CXC is overseen by 5 project managers listed here. You'll see the names of these leads, these project managers, on any specifications that go out for tender. And we try to split up the kind of work that we're asked to do across various policy areas. Of course, our project managers may have specific or particular expertise in these particular areas, but we can do any work that is needed by our Scottish Government colleagues, and we will organise ourselves to deliver those. They're the main contacts. The names listed here are the main contacts between successful bidders and our Scottish Government policy teams. And if we go on to the next slide, I'll say a little bit more about how we work, how people work with us. So we commission a variety of work. As I've said before, the requests are all coming from Scottish Government policy needs. So the driver is Scottish Government. We have research projects of various scales. Perhaps the majority in number could be fairly fast, rapid evidence reviews. We could have longer projects answering specific questions from Scottish Government policy teams. So ranging from 3 or 4 months to maybe 6 to 9 months to answer specific questions that Scottish Government needs help with to build evidence. We also have some postdoctorate research opportunities, which are much more involved and tend to be longer, typically 6 months, 9 months, and the researchers there are embedded with Scottish Government policy teams. And we also do bespoke knowledge exchange workshops and events that help develop future specifications, perhaps, or bring key stakeholders together to sort of refine the nature of a problem sometimes. So the CXC role is to refine the specifications to help Scottish Government policy colleagues come up with research questions that can be really honed to be most useful. So when we're putting out invitations to quote, we're asking people to come back to us within admittedly fairly tight page limits with their proposals. We would work with Scottish Government policy teams to assess those bids. We'd have a panel for each bid to assess them against individual specifications. Go through a little bit later. So we're really looking at the quality criteria laid out in the specification, the 5 quality criteria there, working with CXC and Scottish Government policy colleagues to assess against those. Throughout projects, we're coordinating between Scottish Government and the contractors, and we're working together here. We're really co-creating something to make sure that the output is as useful as it can be for that policy development. So if we can move on here, we're using Slido today because I think we have a fair few people on the call, and we have a couple of questions that if you can enter into Slido here, and I'll be able to see what's coming in. We're going to go through the quality criteria in a minute, and as we do, we'd welcome any questions in the Q&A section here. But first of all, what makes a good project specification for you if you're bidding for work? So, what do you want to see in a specification? And please do put any ideas up here now. I'll give you a moment to do that before we move on to another question and then take you through the quality criteria. We'll have plenty of time to ask questions as well at the end of this session. So clarity, fair enough. Absolutely. Clarity and clear aims. Are there any others typing? We hope to work with our policy colleagues to make the problem as clear as possible, to make the scope as clear as possible, to make the outputs as precise as possible. These are all, I hope we're trying to do these with all of our specifications, avoiding jargon, clarity about the end goals and the aims, consistency. Great. Great, okay, plenty of ideas there. If we can move on to a second question, actually get a chance to answer that. I'll keep an eye on this word cloud. But the second part of this is, what do you find difficult in responding to invitations to quote? I guess it's the other side of the coin, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts here. What do you think make things difficult? Page limit for sure. I'm sure we'll come back to the page limit. It's getting a few mentions here. Got a lot of sympathy with the page limit, but it's there for good reason. The number of bids we might receive could range from, well, there could be 13. I think the maximum is 16. The first one I looked at when I came to CXC was 13. So a page limit, I think, is necessary to give us to make sure there's a consistency of approach, level playing field, and just practically we have on our panel that I mentioned before for assessing bids, CXC is on it, the SG policy colleagues are on it. So we have limited time to look at a lot of bids. So we need it to be a concise bid. But I appreciate that does make things really difficult. And I hope sessions like this and the guidance that's on the specifications themselves will try to help you hone the limited page numbers your best advantage. So other things, scope too broad or a lack of scope, short timescales. Yeah, for sure. So the timescales, sometimes we're determined here by policy need, but we try to make the window as wide as possible. We want as many bids as possible. We want to produce good work. So we're really keen to have a good enough timescale, but I appreciate that it is not always as good as you or we would want. And other questions, or the difficulties around understanding how research will be used. Yeah, the impact. Sure. Yeah. Again, we aim to work with policy colleagues before putting a specification out to make this as clear as possible. We aim to do that. We appreciate that's absolutely necessary for you to put in a good bid. Okay, I'm going to move on to go through the quality criteria, but we will have time for Q&A. We can come back to that. I can check in with Christy and Inish on how those word clouds shape up. And we have a session for Q&A, and you can put questions into the Q&A section on Teams. What I will do then is take you through the quality criteria one by one. So the quality criteria is explicitly laid out on our specifications. There are 5 of them. Understanding the research spec and the policy environment is the first. Second's methodology. The third is about project management. The fourth is about communication and writing reports. And the fifth is about quality assurance and risk. And the specification will give the weightings of each. So the specification has a fair bit of detail about what's expected in all those areas. And I'll hopefully talk through each in turn and give a sense of why things may be not as successful as you'd hope. I give examples of what we've seen in some of the bids recently. So let's look at understanding the research specification first. So the aim here is really, yes, clearly demonstrate that the aim of this project is understood and how the work will address it. And I think it is worth the bold there that's been added in your own words. I think sometimes the problem is people are simply repeating back what it says in the specification. And I think the assessing panel really need to see that it's been digested and understood. So it kind of needs to be played back to the panel that this is understood. In your own words, it helps. We're looking for an understanding of the relevant policy context. So we're talking on this slide here about policy development timelines, research and evidence needs. What we're getting at here is just an understanding and showing an understanding that an awareness of the live or impending consultations or legislation or programs for government commitments in Scotland. So it's just placing this piece of work in the wider context. I think the cross-sectoral section, the cross-sectoral context here is something that's often missing. So just that broader understanding of where this work fits into Scottish Government's wider aims and objectives, or climate change and nature and biodiversity, wider aims and objectives sometimes. So I think what we're looking for here is a really clear statement about demonstrating how a bidder understands this aim and how the work will address that aim. Let's move on to the second quality criteria, the methodology. In the weighting, I say they're all weighted, these quality criteria. This one is usually the heaviest. The spec always gives us a steer about what the methodology should look like. But I think it would always, or almost always, welcome alternatives. So the spec will say we think the methodology should look like this, but it will always say we welcome contractors to suggest other ways of doing it. So we're looking for really robust methodologies explained in clear terms, in plain English, with really clearly defined outputs for each stage of the work that you're proposing. I think we're looking for a really clear articulation of the steps that this involves, whether that's data collection, analysis, rationale for choosing particular types of evidence, really clearly highlighting evidence gaps that you foresee here. I guess that's the third bullet point about honestly addressing strengths and weaknesses. I think what is often missing in bids that I've seen is the sense of acknowledging gaps and limitations of the chosen approach. That makes it really, that aspect is really important for us, for the assessment panel, when we're comparing methodologies between bids. It's often missing, or it's not clear, or it's lacking. This section on methodology can really help demonstrate that understanding of who the audience is here. All of our work is intended to help drive that policy development. So the thinking, I think, is really helpful to have in mind that this is, where possible, it's not technical terminology and acronyms. This is a policy audience that is going to be time poor and maybe with a different level of expertise to the academic understanding you may have in this field. So this section can really help demonstrate an understanding of the audience. I think where you're listing academic references here, it's really helpful to clearly state how they relate to the specification itself. So the assessment panel really wants to know what you know about the relevant work in this policy area. Academic or journal references don't necessarily place your knowledge in a policy context. So really clear to always be specifying how this relates to policy development. I think the problems I've seen in this area, in the methodology section, they can often be around realistic timing. The budgets may be limited, the timescale may be very limited, so that clearly places problems on what's feasible within a methodology. There are often problems, or it often seems to be difficult to imagine. There are often data availability problems, I would say, which are maybe not acknowledged in a methodology. And I think it's really helpful with this criteria, and with all the others actually, is to replicate the quality criteria that's been referenced in the specifications. So use the headings that have been given in the specifications to help answer the questions. And that helps. It sounds really obvious, but it is, if you're assessing lots of bids as a panel member, it really helps to be able to see how the things that the specification said are important are directly being addressed by a particular bid. So if we move on to the project management, this is all about the team that's being proposed here. It's a 6-page limit, which I know is challenging. CVs can be added as an appendix, so out with the 6-page limit. But within the 6 pages themselves, the panel really wants to see how there is a strong project team being proposed, and that you're demonstrating why this particular team will deliver this particular project well. So the assessment itself is on what's written in the 6 pages. So not the reputation of the organization, of course, it's just what's said in the specification and what's said in this particular bid. We're really wanting to see that the team members that are being mentioned will be available if this is successful. That's often something that's not mentioned, or it's maybe not addressed as a risk either, that the named team members won't be there all the way through. We'll come to risk in a little while. So we really want you to see very clearly how each member of staff that's being proposed fits with the particular tasks that are being mentioned in the methodology, the particular analytical steps that are mentioned in methodologies. Sometimes it's not clear who is the main contact throughout the project, how they will be involved throughout the project. And sometimes it depends on the nature of the specification, but there could be compliance issues related to data protection that aren't really addressed. If they're not an issue, it's fair enough to just say in literally 3 or 4 or 5 words why it's not an issue, or explain why it's not an issue going forward. But clarity and specificity of who is doing what, and the named individuals are available. Super helpful for the assessing panel. If we go to the next element, communication and report writing, I would advise, if you haven't, people on the call may already have done this, but to look at the CXC published reports, and there's a style guide on our website too, but you'll see that our aim with the CXC report, given that the intended audience is the policy people in Scottish Government, we're tending for really short executive summaries, plain English, avoiding jargon. Overall, the reports, we're really keen to limit the length of reports where we can. We want these to be really clear and succinct. We want to understand in the bid what your approach is to writing this particular report. So really important to show an understanding, demonstrate the understanding of the audience, respond to the specification rather than repeating it. We would often see bids that are marked down because they're essentially maybe just repeating what the spec says with regards to communication and report writing, rather than explaining how this particular bid will deliver on that. So really helpful in this section to explain how you're going to get to the end point. We asked for links to previous work, and I think, again, really important to link to reports that are relevant for writing policy, for developing policy. The panel wants to see examples of work for a policy audience and understand of the role of the team members that are being proposed in delivering those bits of work. So the links really need to be relevant, and they need to be linked to particular people in your teams. That's not always the case. Really helpful to see any more detail about how you would plan to visualize or to present data or present findings in ways that are most useful for the reader. So spell that out if you have ideas. And I think the last point about data management tasks, we're thinking here, are you going to have to pay for data, for example? Is that clearly part of the consideration on how you handle the communication and presentation of this? Can we go to the next bit of the criteria? On this part, quality assurance and risk mitigation, of course, things can go wrong and often do go wrong, inevitably don't go as planned. The section here is all about demonstrating that you've anticipated the key risks, thought about how to minimize the chances of those things coming about, and there is a plan in place to reduce the potential impact of any of those things. And this section is for considering throughout the life of a project. When it comes to communications and report writing, clearly we would want to see a specific named individual who's having a second pair of eyes over this work. But throughout, we want to have a sense that throughout the stages of the work, whether that's evidence gathering or synthesis or drafting, who is it that's making sure the quality is going to be there? When are they going to do the checks? How do you reassure a assessing panel that you've thought about this? And what would you do if things go wrong? I'm trying to think of some examples of mitigations here. We have example table at the bottom. You can present this in lots of different ways. But I know I've seen plenty of bids that have described, for example, if things go wrong, the mitigation is tell CXC, and that's maybe not very convincing as a way of dealing with it. This section is really getting at proactively anticipating what could go wrong and having sensible suggestions about how you would prevent that. And for simple projects, they may be very straightforward things. Most likely it is, but it's good to see them spelt out and the panel can see that it's being thought through. Good to demonstrate understanding of risk. I think the particular risk that comes up is around staffing and data accessibility. They're the most common risks that do need to be tackled here. I would say the other thing to stress is that we're looking for it's project-specific information. So quoting ISO numbers or having generic information about quality assurance or risk systems more generally is fine, but it's background information. This section really, and the assessing panel really are looking for detail about what's being considered about this project and about all stages of this project.